The Handkerchief by Great 78. Chapter 68. Sectumsepra. Crying in a dingy toilet with a murdered ghost was bad enough. Being watched by Potter whilst crying in a dingy toilet with a murdered ghost made it far worse. The chosen git who fell for Voldemort's tricks and nearly got Hermione killed. The golden asshole who caused the death of his cousin and forced Draco into the head of Black House. Draco spun around, whipping his wand from his robe pocket quickly. Potter drew his own just as rapidly. He hurled a non-verbal expulso at the other wizard, hoping to blast him back out of the door into the corridor. It missed, going wide and smashing into the wall sconce. Potter leapt to the side, pointing his wand to cast a non-verbal spell, but Draco threw up a quick shield charm taught him by Hermione in 5th year. Draco raised his wand again. Bombardier, he thought. "No! No, stop it!" cried Myrtle in a loud, clanging voice. "Stop! Stop!" The Bombardier missed as well, making the rubbish bin behind Potter blast apart. Potter fell and returned a curse at Draco. It whizzed close to his ear and smashed the huge cistern behind him, throwing water and shards of porcelain in all directions, some striking him angrily. Draco was forcibly reminded of Lucius's crystal lowball glass shards, and grit being compelled magically into his skin. The sting of the shards, the jolt of pain, brought him back to that day in a matter of a second. "Crush!" he said, without hardly thinking, surprised to hear his own voice over Myrtle's wails. "Sectumsepra!" Potter yelled from where he sat on the floor. Blood. The blood he'd been imagining earlier. It was gushing everywhere. Only now, it wasn't just imagined in his mind. It was a searing pain in his chest, a stuttering, slurrying, choking gasp in his lungs. He closed his eyes and had the sensation of falling almost peacefully. When he opened his eyes again, he was lying on the floor, in immense pain, watching water flow under the stalls, hearing Myrtle's screams, his own blood gurgling in his chest as it flowed and surged from his body, and a voice. "No!" Suddenly, Potter loomed over him, splashing down next to his chest, a look like panic and, was it concern, on his face. His hands touched Draco's arm tentatively. "No, I didn't." Draco reached for the breast pocket of his robes, if he could just find his handkerchief. But his hands only found blood and soft, fleshy stuff that he drove out of his mind quickly. Myrtle began screaming now in earnest. "Murder! Murder in the toilet! Murder!" Draco closed his eyes. Myrtle was enjoying this too much, he could tell. Another banging sound. Was Potter trying to finish him off? But no, it was the door opening. Then there was another pair of hands that touched his, another voice that spoke. The words were soft, indistinct, a shushing, balm-like sound, calming draught in verbal form. He opened his eyes and looked into the wide, frightened black eyes of Severus Snape. The pain seemed to recede a bit, becoming almost bearable again. Draco tried to take a deep breath, only to gag and gurgle on more blood. Snape shook his head no, slightly, never wavering from his incantations. He wiped at Draco's face with a conjured cloth. After a moment or two more, he felt as though he could take a shallow breath, and did so. He looked up, past Professor Snape. Myrtle floated near the ceiling, weeping and sobbing loudly, though in a delighted way, as though she was enjoying all the fervour. Potter continued to hover nearby, standing a few feet away, mouth agape in horror at the sight in front of him. Now Draco knew it must be serious, if Potter was disgusted. It occurred to him dimly that he was improving with Professor Snape's incantations. He might manage to live through this after all. Then he wondered if it would have been better if he had not. "You need the hospital wing. There may be a certain amount of scarring, but if you take Dittany immediately, we might avoid even that. Come." Professor Snape lifted him by the shoulder into a sitting position, pocketing Draco's wand as he did so. Draco was surprised to realize that the blood had stopped spurting from his chest. The professor helped him stand, slinging one of Draco's arms around his own shoulder. Professor Snape put an arm around Draco's waist and they began to move to the door. Snape pulled open the door, turning back to look at Potter. "And you, Potter, you wait here for me." Professor Snape half carried him across the castle, finally, laboriously approaching the double doors of the hospital wing. Though he didn't have his eyes open the entire time, Draco thought the corridors were empty. Dinner was finishing downstairs, and most of the students would be back in their common rooms. But as they approached the doors to the infirmary, a slight figure stepped out from the statue of the Mediwitch. "Oh my God! Oh my God, Draco, what? Professor Snape, what happened? Did you fall off your broom at practice?" The panic and fear in Hermione's voice brought all of his own worries back to the surface, rising above the pain. He did not want her to see him this way. "Your friend, Mr. Potter, used a curse of which he had no knowledge, and for which he was ill-prepared for the consequences. Mr. Malfoy took the curse. How did you know to come here, Miss Granger? Did Potter tell you he was going to hurt Mr. Malfoy?"
"Harry! No, Harry didn't. I came because of this,"
she said with tears in her voice, holding up a blood-saturated handkerchief. Draco now saw that her wrist, hands, and sleeve were covered in blood. Of course, Draco thought, closing his eyes. He kept it in his breast pocket, directly where Potter's curse had slashed him. Snape stopped short to look at the item for a moment, then hurried Draco into the hospital wing. He laid Draco on the closest bed, and Hermione helped him swing his legs up onto the bed. "Dittany, blood-replenishing potions, and murtlap," Professor Snape called across the room to the matron who was bustling over. He rushed to follow the matron as she turned back to her potions cupboard to help her locate the necessary items.
"What happened?"
Hermione asked, taking his blood-stained hand. The words came out in fits and starts as he tried to push down the pain. "Potter found me in a toilet. I upset a panic attack. He surprised me." She summoned a bowl from a different bedside table and used her wand to fill the bowl with water. She cast a Tergio to remove the saturating blood from the handkerchief, then dipped it in the water. She dabbed it on his head, wiping at the blood, then cast another Tergio to siphon away the blood from the cloth. Then she redipped the cloth in the water and wiped his brow again.
"He attacked you with no warning."
The shock in her voice was clear. "No, I cast first. Expulso, to get him out." Draco closed his eyes, a wave of nausea coming over him at the memory. My God, I almost said cursed, unforgivable, Professor Snape had returned with Pomfrey, carrying several potions.
"Lie back, Mr. Malfoy. Let's take a look at what we've got."
Madame Pomfrey was business as always, though he could tell that even she was a bit rattled by this. It must have looked bad. He'd lost sight of Hermione and worried that she'd left. Was it because he'd nearly used an unforgivable curse? He hadn't meant to. He wasn't even certain he could bring one off if he tried. In reality, that whole moment felt like a strange dream, as though he were reliving several memories at once. There was his duel with Potter in second year, the crystal goblet encounter with his father, the crucios his father had cast upon him after his first year home with a red number 2 of 40 on his class grades report. He tried to take a deep breath to calm down, but the pain seared through him. Snape met his eyes with an angry look on his face, and stalked away a minute later. Pomfrey spoke up to be heard across the room. "Miss Granger, if you're going to stand there, you might as well make yourself useful. Come and hold this poultice to this large gash near the top, whilst I work on the others. If we're lucky, the scars will be hardly noticeable." Hermione came back to his side, and he tried not to focus on how much that felt like the air had just returned to his gasping lungs. Her copper eyes were filled with tears, and her cheeks were red, as though she'd wiped away several tears already. But she was there, and she was looking him in the eyes with what he hoped was more concern than disgust. His eyes pleaded with her for understanding, for forgiveness he knew he hadn't earned. But Pomfrey was talking to him, and he wasn't following her. She lifted his head a bit, pouring in a potion almost before he'd realized his mouth was open. It flowed down into his stomach warmly, and the feeling of sweet, relaxing calm overtook him within moments. The last thing he saw as his eyes drifted closed was Hermione, tears still hovering above her cheeks, a tiny, watery smile on her face. He woke to full light outside, Hermione sitting by his bed. She had his books pulled from his book bag, fully engrossed in his copy of Advanced Potions Making. "You're still here?" His voice came out hoarsely, barely above a whisper, and he cleared his throat. She looked up, startled to hear him speak, but clearly relieved. "Oh! Madame Pomfrey spoke as though you'd be knocked out a while longer. She gave you a double dose of dreamless sleep. She said your diagnostics showed extreme fatigue. You've actually been out for about a day and a half. It's Friday now." He made as if to get up, startled at the idea that he could have slept so long. She placed a hand on his shoulder and pushed him back to bed. "Draco, you need to rest. It's all right. Everything will still be there when you return." "I'm sure." He smiled feebly at her, so relieved that she wasn't hexing and cursing him into oblivion. "I just wasn't sure you would be. Still here, I mean. Were you here the whole time?"
"Merlin, no. About 10 minutes after you fell asleep, I heard Pansy screaming all the way up the corridor, so I left through Madame Pomfrey's office."
"I saw Blaise and Theo before breakfast yesterday, and they said Madame Pomfrey kicked her out about 3 minutes later, and declared your bed off limits to visitors. They brought your book bag up here and left it with Pomfrey so that you'd have something to do when you woke up. I've been looking at your copy of Advanced Potion Making. It's really interesting to see your notes. There's so many little things that you tweaked on your own. How did you know to do some of these things?"
"I'm not sure what you mean."
"Well, just that sometimes you mention stirring things a certain way that's different from what the author said. Or you mentioned adding an ingredient that wasn't in the ingredients list. How did you know to do these things?"
"Well, I guess just from reading other potions books, adding in a bit of trial and error, you know."
"In any of your readings, did you come across anyone named Prince?"
"No, as in a title or a last name."
"Either?"
"Still no," he said. "Why?"
"Oh, just curious. Harry's book this year had tons of notes a lot like these. It was a used copy, and the previous owner called themselves a prince." She dabbed at her eyes with her handkerchief, which Draco noticed was now an odd shade of faded orange-yellow. "It's where he came across that curse."
"The one he used on you?"
This last part had come out as a whisper, and Draco had strained to hear her. She would not meet his eyes.
"Well, I had never heard of it, but it was, effective. And inventive, so I'm not surprised that Potter didn't come up with that on his own."
She looked up a bit sharply to find him smiling at her, and she smiled back, a bit sadly. So, that's how he's done so well this year in potions. He had this book. It had lots of notes as well, Draco asked. She nodded. Well, at least now I know why he was nearly beating me in potions. 2nd place to you I can take, but 3rd place to that tosser. They both laughed a little, Draco holding his arms gingerly to his sides and trying not to wince. You need to rest. Madame Pomfrey will probably get you some breakfast here in a moment, she said, putting the book back in his bag and standing to go. No, please don't hurry off. Draco reached out for her hand. You said I'm off limits for visits, so no one else is coming. In fact, how are you here? She let you in? Hermione quirked an eyebrow at him and said, Actually, I'm a part of Madame Pomfrey's internship program for those who are interested in studying healing. I just started Wednesday when you came in. She doesn't usually accept 6 years this late in the school year, but she made an exception for me. Gryffindors. Always getting special treatment. Speaking of, did Potter get off scot-free for what happened? No. He got detention every Saturday until the end of term. I think it should have been more, but that's what Snape decided. She folded her handkerchief carefully and tucked it into her cuff. You weren't able to get the stains out, then? He asked, gesturing to her wrist. No, I tried both magical and mundane tricks, but I think it's just permanently that color now. She bit her lip adorably. I can make you another one. No! Her copper eyes blazed in brief worry and possessiveness, hand coming up to cover her wrist, as if afraid he might summon it away from her. No, I like this one. I know it's got some stains, but it's like I've said before. It means that it's seen some things, that we have experienced those things together. She gave him a quick kiss, running a hand through his hair to push it back from his forehead. I love you, she said, and then she was gone. Draco lay back on the bed, thinking. She forgave him, then, for attempting an unforgivable curse. He wondered if Snape was only biding his time until Draco was out of hospital wing, to give him detention as well. Surely Potter had told him what Draco had attempted. And yet, for causing Draco all of this pain, Potter had only gotten a bit of Saturday detention. That was a bit curious, he thought. It seemed like nearly killing another student might warrant more punishment than that. But if Potter were expelled, he would be an easy target for the Dark Lord, presumably. Perhaps Snape was keeping him safe. It was the same old question that kept popping up in his mind. Which side was Snape on? Which side was he lying to? Draco still could not be certain. Chapter 69. Friends, Flora, and Fluff. On Saturday morning, Madame Pomfrey consented to opening a window so that he could overhear the Quidditch match commentary. He could not be certain, but it sounded as though only Macmillan was calling the match. There was an unnecessary amount of pontificating here and there. Hermione arrived late in the afternoon to visit. So, it sounds as though the Lions have won the cup, even without the seeker who lived, Draco joked, sitting up in bed reading his arithmancy textbook. Yes, the match ended a few hours ago, she sighed, dropping into her chair at his bedside. I know, I got to hear the play-by-play calling, he said drolly, and she giggled. I take it Ernie isn't your favourite commentator? Let's just say, if given the choice between Lovegood going on about butterflies and the clouds, or Macmillan giving a 3-minute lecture about the trajectory of bludgers and wind speeds against the quaffle, I would probably take Luna. I thought he was going to start talking about the airspeed velocity of an unladen swallow. Hermione frowned in confusion. Where have you heard... Is that something that Blaise says? How do you know about Blaise? Draco asked, his mind still stuck on Luna. I mean, I've met him. We've had classes together, and I taught him defensive spells in the dungeons in Vithia. Hermione gave him a look as though he had a head injury, not a chest injury, No, well, it's not my place to gossip, but he's seeing Lovegood. I think since Christmas, though he's liked her for a long time."
"Oh, yes, I can see that."
Hermione nodded. "Ginny and Harry have also gotten together, soon after the match. That was a long time coming, too. He's been hung up on her all year. I think he's actually liked her for a long time, and never admitted it to himself. Yes, boys are good at keeping their thoughts and feelings to themselves. Sometimes we even lie to ourselves. Look at me. I liked you from the moment we met, but I couldn't admit it for a long time." He left unsaid all the things that he'd had to keep to himself this year, things that he could not share with anyone. But that wasn't 100% true, was it? He had been able to share everything with one person. Well, a sort of person. A non-being of sorts. "I need to go. I have homework to finish. There's an essay due in herbology and one for charms and transfigurations, too, by the way, but I'm sure you'll have extra days to finish them." She put her hands on his shoulders and squeezed, kissing his lips deeply. "I think I'll be discharged tomorrow," he said. "What a coincidence!" Hermione giggled quietly. "I think that's when my stint as a healer intern ends as well." She blew a kiss at him as she exited. He sat back, head resting on the wall behind him. His mind was working quickly, thinking. If he wanted her to know, there was a way, he realized now. It took him well over a week to read through the class notes that Hermione gave him, and to catch up on the homework assignments from teachers. By the last full week of May, he was almost more stressed than he had been before the incident with Potter. He hadn't had much time to get into the room of hidden things. Only once had he gotten away for a few minutes, and that was more so to check on the birds than anything else. He was happy to see that they were thriving. He could tell that Dobby was still coming in to feed them when he wasn't able to. He looked forward to the long weekend ahead, as Monday classes would be out for the bank holiday. He hoped to spend a bit of time with Mai, but also work on the cabinet. He thought that he had gotten a bit of a breakthrough before the slashing incident, and he wanted to see what he could do to finish. There was only a month until the end of term, and his mission hung over him like a thundercloud. Sunday afternoon he found Hermione in the library, studying with Neville for their herbology written exam. There was an extraordinary number of plants for which they needed to know the Latin name, its description, its uses, and how to care for it. They also needed to know which other plants each were compatible, or which plants would counteract its uses. He came to their table, stopping behind an empty chair, and silently asking permission from them to sit. Neville looked up, grimaced a tiny bit, and said, "Fine, but I'm staying as chaperone." Draco laughed silently, whilst Hermione turned red and focused more intently on her notes. For the next hour, Neville called out plant descriptions, Latin or common names of plants, or potions used for plants, with Draco and Hermione trying to beat each other to the answer. At various points they were joined by Hannah Abbott, Ernie Macmillan, and Padma Patil. Draco was surprised Smuffliato had held up so well, then realized he must have not been the only one to cast one. "I think you're all ready," Neville pronounced after a while, as the laughter died down when Padma and Ernie answered a question at the same time, word for word. "But, Nev, we didn't get a chance to quiz you. Will you be all right for the test?" Padma asked, hiccuping in laughter. "Don't worry about him. He knows every plant there is to know, plus their features and functions," Hannah said to Padma, though her love-struck eyes never left Neville. Everyone except Padma began to gather their things to go. She was staying behind to study arithmancy. Ernie hurried off by himself, whilst Neville and Hannah strolled out hand in hand, slowly behind him. "So, you and Ernie seem to hit it off, don't you think?" Hermione cocked her head at the young witch. Padma laughed. "Are you trying to play matchmaker, Hermione?" "Yes, Ernie and I hit it off at one time, you might say. But word is nowadays that he hits it off a lot more with Michael Corner." Padma smiled knowingly. "Oh, oh," Hermione said, realization dawning. "I didn't realize." "Yes, I don't think Michael realized until they were snogging at Ravenclaw's party last year. But I'm guessing Ernie's tongue down his throat and hand down his pants finally clued him in." Padma laughed a bit at that memory. "Well, that's good for them, then," said Draco, shouldering his bag. "Granger, I need to discuss our Ancient Runes project. All right if I walk you to Gryffindor Tower?" "See you guys later. And, Draco, any time you want to join in at a Ravenclaw party, you can come as my guest." Padma winked at him, and he blushed and stammered, then noticed that both witches were silently giggling. "It's all right," Padma reassured him quietly. "I was only joking. I know about you and Hermione. Most of the girls do." "What?" Draco asked loudly. From 2 tables down, a loud chorus of "Shh!" echoed down to them. Draco cast a new muffliato. "What do you mean, most of the girls know? Who is most of the girls?" "I just mean the upperclassmen in Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff, and a handful of the Gryffindors. But don't worry, your secret is safe with us. Everyone knows that most of the Slytherins and half the Gryffindors would draw and quarter you both." They wished her good night and left the library, Draco casting yet another muffliato as they walked. "I'm guessing the Weaselette falls more into the drawn and quartered category than in the keeping it a secret category, right?" he asked her. "Most likely. She's like her mother in some ways, fiercely protective and loyal to her own. Ginny knows that Ron has had a crush on me, off and on, for a few years, and Molly seems to think that he and I will get married someday, likely right after graduation, and start pumping out grandbabies. I've told Molly that he and I aren't really that compatible, but I don't think it's fully sunk in." They climbed a staircase, and Draco was surprised to find themselves close to the entrance to the Room of Requirement. Hermione seemed to be leading him there without his realizing. But as they rounded the corner, they came upon the sight of Neville and Hannah, holding hands and laughing as they stopped short in the hall, turned, and ran back the way they'd come. Apparently this was the 3rd time past the door to the Room of Requirement, because it appeared in the wall and opened. Hannah peered inside, then whirled on Neville, exclaiming in surprise at whatever the room held. He leaned forward and kissed Hannah then, pressing his body against her. Hannah raised to her tiptoes, then lifted a knee against Neville's hip. Without breaking the kiss, he grabbed her legs and wrapped them around his waist, then turned them both and used his back to open the door further. Once they were inside, the door slammed shut and dematerialized. Draco watched this all, more than a bit impressed, then turned to Hermione. "Wow, I did not think Longbottom had that in him," he said. He's definitely got moves," Hermione said, still staring at the spot where the other couple had stood. "You got turned on by that, didn't you?" he teased. "You didn't?" She smiled at him salaciously. "Oh, I did. I was just checking to make sure you did too," he joked. "Astronomy Tower." "It's raining," Caldwell the Cantankerous. "I'm afraid we'll be spotted. Everyone is a bit restless without classes going on and rain outside." She looked very disappointed, matching how Draco felt. "Come on," he said, tugging her down the corridor. They came upon a classroom that was sometimes used for study hall or detentions. Luckily, it was empty. I've noticed this is often empty during my prefect rounds. "You're right," she breathed. Once inside, they warded the door and moved to the front of the room. She drew him to her, kissing him wildly, running her hands up and down his torso. I should have known you'd have a classroom kink," he drawled. She stiffened in his arms and made to pull away, a look of embarrassment on her face. "It's okay, love. I kind of do too," he said, pulling her hands away from her face. "No, you don't. You're just saying that," she said. "Hermione, I've watched you be the teacher's pet, sucking on those blasted sugar quills, and showing off your brilliance in every class we've shared, which is a lot of them. How can I not?" She squeezed his biceps playfully, finally meeting his grin with one of her own. "Well then, happy early birthday, Draco." She pushed him back onto the teacher's desk, climbing playfully to sit in his lap. They made full use of the classroom, and it turned out that Hermione was right. It was a very happy early birthday indeed. Thank you for listening to this chapter of The Handkerchief by Great 78.